Part 2. The reactor built in haste. Repent at leisure to understand the Windscale fire. You must first understand what the Windscale piles actually were. They were not power plants. They were not research reactors. They were weapons factories, built in secret, designed in haste, and dedicated to one purpose only: producing plutonium for Britain's atomic bomb. This single fact explains every design decision, every corner cut, every risk accepted. From the very beginning, Windscale was a military project disguised as a civilian facility, and that secret defined everything that followed. Hiroshima, Nagasaki. The war ends, but a new one begins. The Cold War settles over Europe like a winter that will not thaw, and Britain, exhausted and bankrupt, faces an uncomfortable truth. It is no longer a superpower. The Americans have the bomb. The Soviets are racing to build their own. Britain, which led the world in nuclear physics before the war, is suddenly a spectator. And for a nation that still thinks of itself as an empire, this is intolerable. In secret, Prime Minister Clement Attlee authorizes a crash program to build a British atomic bomb. Parliament is not consulted. The public is not informed. The Treasury is simply told to find the money. The project is codenamed High Explosive Research. It is so secret that even the name is a lie. The first problem: plutonium. There are two ways to build an atomic bomb. You can use highly enriched uranium, which requires a massive industrial complex to separate the rare U-235 isotope from common U-238. The Americans built this at Oak Ridge, Tennessee. It cost billions. It took years. Or you can use plutonium, which is created inside a nuclear reactor by irradiating uranium fuel and then chemically extracting the new element. The Americans built this at Hanford, Washington. It also cost billions. It also took years. Britain has neither billions nor years. So British engineers do what engineers always do when faced with impossible constraints. They improvise. The Americans used water to cool their plutonium reactors. The Columbia River provided an endless supply. The water flowed through the core, absorbed heat, and was discharged back into the river. Simple, effective, impossible to replicate in Britain. Britain has no Columbia River. Britain has no equivalent geography. And Britain has no time to build an elaborate water cooling system from scratch. So British engineers propose an alternative: air cooling. Instead of water, they will push air through the reactor core. Giant fans at the front of the building will force air through. Thousands of horizontal channels drilled through a massive graphite block. The air will cool the uranium fuel cartridges, absorb heat, and rise up a 400-foot chimney. Simple, cheap, fast. There is, of course, a reason the Americans rejected air cooling. It is less efficient. It is harder to control. And if something goes wrong, there is no way to contain it. But Britain cannot afford to be cautious. Britain needs plutonium. Britain needs it now. The design is approved. Construction begins in 1947. The site chosen is a remote stretch of coast in Cumbria, near the village of Windscale, deliberately isolated, far from major cities, far from prying eyes. The official cover story: a government research facility. The workers are told nothing. The locals are told nothing. The reactor simply appears, rising out of the Cumbrian mist, like something from a science fiction film. It is enormous. The graphite core alone weighs 2,000 tons. It contains nearly 2,000 horizontal fuel channels, each packed with uranium cartridges. Above the core, the charge face, where operators insert and remove fuel, is a 4-story wall of concrete and steel. Behind it, the chimney rises 400 feet into the gray English sky, an engineering triumph, and an accident waiting to happen. The first warning signs appear almost immediately. In 1949, during a routine inspection, workers discover that some uranium cartridges have swollen and cracked. The aluminium casings, designed to contain the radioactive fuel, have ruptured. Fission products are leaking into the cooling air. This is precisely the scenario that Terence Price warned about during construction. Precisely the scenario dismissed as too unlikely to worry about. The problem is not repaired. It is managed. Operators learned to identify burst cartridges by their distinctive radioactive signature. They developed procedures to push damaged cartridges out the back of the reactor and into a water-filled skip. A patch, not a fix. But it works. Most of the time. Meanwhile, another problem is growing silently in the heart of the reactor. Wigner energy. Eugene Wigner's discovery is not yet widely understood. Even the physicists at Windscale are only dimly aware of the phenomenon. They know the graphite is changing over time. They know the reactor is getting harder to control. They know stored energy is accumulating somewhere in the lattice. They do not know how much. They do not know how fast. And they do not know how to measure it. The only known remedy is heat the entire core to over 250 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, the graphite becomes slightly flexible. The dislocations relax. The stored energy releases slowly and safely. It is a crude procedure, more art than science. The operators reduce the airflow, let the fission products heat the graphite, and hope the temperature rises evenly. It works. 8 times, it works. The 9th time, it does not. Britain tests its first atomic bomb. The weapon, codenamed Hurricane, is detonated aboard a frigate anchored off the Montebello Islands in Western Australia. The yield is approximately 25 kilotons, comparable to Nagasaki. Britain is now the 3rd nuclear power. But the celebration is short-lived. The Americans have already moved on. In November 1952, the United States tests Ivy Mike, the world's first hydrogen bomb. Its yield is 10.4 megatons, 400 times larger than the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. Britain is suddenly, painfully, obsolete. The race is on again. This time, a thermonuclear weapon, and the pressure on Windscale to produce more plutonium, faster, cheaper, at any cost, becomes intense. The political deadline, 1957. The government has promised that Britain will test its first hydrogen bomb by the end of the year. The weapons designers are waiting for plutonium. The military is waiting for the test. The cabinet is watching. And Windscale, the sole source of British weapons-grade plutonium, is struggling to keep up. The reactor is old. The graphite is saturated with Wigner energy. The burst cartridges are becoming more frequent, but the operators are ordered to increase output. Warnings are ignored. Safety margins are eroded. Annealing cycles are postponed. By October 1957, Windscale Pile 1 is a pressure vessel filled with combustible fuel, stored energy, and human exhaustion. It is only a matter of time. The men who ran Windscale knew the risks. They were not villains. They were not ideologues. They were engineers and operators, doing the best they could with the tools they had. They worked long shifts in difficult conditions. They were underpaid and overworked. They were told their country needed them, and they believed it. Tom Tuohy, the man who would later climb onto the roof with a fire hose, was not a protester, not a whistleblower. He was a company man, a loyal employee who believed in the mission. When he saw smoke coming from the chimney, his first instinct was not to run away, not to call a press conference. His first instinct was to fix the problem. This is what makes his story so powerful. He was not a dissident. He was not an outsider. He was the system, the very heart of the system. And when the system failed, he was the one who paid the price. Not with his life, not immediately, but with his reputation, with his peace of mind. With 30 years of silence imposed by the government he served, the Windscale piles were decommissioned long ago. Pile 1 was permanently shut down after the fire. Pile 2, undamaged, continued operating until 1958, when it was also closed. Both reactors still stand today, sealed and silent. The chimney still rises 400 feet above the Cumbrian coast. The filters, Cockcroft's Follies, are still there, rusting but intact. And inside the sealed reactor vessel, 2,000 tons of irradiated graphite still hold the memory of that October fire. A monument, though no one intended it to be. A monument to ambition. A monument to secrecy. A monument to the men who gave everything and received nothing in return. In part 3, the fire itself, you will watch, hour by hour, as the operators fight a losing battle against an invisible enemy. You will stand beside Tom Tuohy as he makes the impossible decision. You will feel the heat of the burning core and taste the smoke rising from the chimney, and you will understand why. For 30 years, the British government did everything in its power to make sure you never heard this story. The fire is coming, and this time, water is the only option.